A pleasure to meet all at last, and welcome once again to HJN Super Graphics, where in this particular instance of HJN Season 4, I decided to go back on a certain trip I did in fall of 2021, and I talked about a bunch of video games at that time. Now I'm going to continue on with some more of that exact topic. For this instance, in Super Graphics, this is HJN number 2584, and we're going to be talking a bit about the Ninja Turtles Cowabunga collection. So, here we go. In summer 2022, Ninja Turtles pretty much got itself a bit of a revamp for modern day consoles. Two games, of course, were a more modernized arcade port reminiscent of the Streets of Rage series known as Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, which came out in June 2022, but within 2 months came another game, the Cowabunga collection. This was actually made as a means of compiling some of the best of the classic Ninja Turtles games from the 1980s as well as the 1990s. These of course included NES, Game Boy, as well as Super Nintendo ports of various arcade games as well as various entries in the series, including the famous Nintendo's Turtles in Time. There of course were other entries made from other consoles like the Sega Genesis, but for the most part this circulated around the majority of events from the Nintendo games. There of course was the very famous NES Classic, which was one of the very only instances to ever have a green colored cartridge. And on top of all that, Ninja Turtles on NES, a product of Konami, and more so, the very same developer slash publisher that was able to allow for Ninja Turtles to thrive very well in the arcades throughout the 80s and 90s, especially with the release of the cartoon and later the live action films. But after the first NES came out, it wasn't necessarily met upon with positive outlooks from everybody. It was mostly made as a form of novelty at the time. It wasn't really a point where games were at their best. Yeah, the NES was praised as a big classic that everybody ought to play, but not everybody looked to it with sparkles and charm. The way I see it though, the Genesis was the true tiger amongst the game console competitions known as the console wars, where Nintendo and Sega would bash against each other with fist pumping and lots of digitized pixels at their maximum. It ain't nothing like today's incredible journey between the PlayStation and Xbox. And even though Nintendo has fallen behind, it still does contend in its own unique way, often having to borrow a lot of bits that the PlayStation was already well known for. Yeah, there's a lot of PS5, Xbox Scarlet games that have often gotten poured into the inventory of the Nintendo Switch. It does almost lead us to wonder though, what kind of new console would Nintendo make now that PS5 and Xbox Series X have entered into the mix? Well, only time will tell, because Generation 9 has yet to come to a close. And we'll just have to see what Generation 10 gives us in video game consoles, as well as games that come with them. But you know what though? What I will say is that browsing through all the games and playing through them all does give me a unique piece of nostalgia. Something I didn't realize I'd have. Going through side-scrolling platforming games, to beat 'em ups, running guns, navigating through maps, collecting various resources and power-ups, and even tournament-style fighting, on par with the likes of Street Fighter and Mortal Kombat, as well as some other contenders at the time. Yeah, Ninja Turtles has certainly managed to cross over in many ways possible. And of course, we certainly can't forget the many characters that we have come to know throughout the years. There, of course, were the famous 4 Turtles, plus their Master Splinter, a rat, if you will. Their human alloy, April O'Neil, as well as Casey Jones. Not to mention, there were the many villains, from Shredder to Krang, the famous Brain. Then, of course, Rocksteady and Bebop, followed along by Toka and Rassar, and many other villains that would also follow along after the success of the original cartoon that started it all, and the comics, then the live action films, then the many other shows and movies that would follow along after that point in history. Safe to say that with all the stuff that we've gotten in Ninja Turtles history, as well as, believe it or not, many more Ninja Turtles games that have come out since the likes of both Shredder's Revenge and the Cowabunga collection, we do have a pretty good chance of having much more Ninja Turtle stuff. Not to mention, by 2023 was when we were able to get a fresh new piece taken from one of the more recent sides of the Ninja Turtles TV shows. Yeah, basically a Netflix movie about the latest Ninja Turtles show does at least give us hope that we're going to have a fresh new continuity with lots of new stuff to explore. It seems that in the same way that how Transformers had gotten us a lot of continuities as well as a lot of games in tied or tandem with the bunch, I'd almost wonder, when it comes to Transformers, are we ever going to get a game based off of Transformers 1? Maybe that's what the latest installment could be based off of. But in Ninja Turtles, with all the new shows and movies coming around just as well, there's a lot of video game adaptations on those parts as well. In fact, there was a more recent piece that was based on the 2012 series, which most people tend to look at being about as good as the original 87 cartoon, following the success of the comics. But let's be real here. There's lots of games that are mostly following upon the success of the continuities as well as storylines established from within. Not to mention the way that they're animated, the way that there's lots of voice actors, both old and new, ones we will get to know better than others, and ones that we are just knowing for the very first time. It doesn't really make you think, could we have any more than just what we're currently offered? With the way that there were so many old Transformers and Ninja Turtles games followed by many, many, many more pieces, other franchises have pretty much done the exact same thing, believe it or not. And other companies have been taking advantage of these types of circumstances. But let's be honest, not every contender is made to be a masterpiece. Yeah. And in the case of Cowabunga Collection, one of a few pieces of 2022 history in video gaming, I will say my experiences with the games involved, with the games included, and with the variety that I had seen in all these games, I'd say it probably comes down to a good old nostalgic piece of 7.9 out of 10.1. So, not exactly enough to really meet all the standards that I would normally give because these were older games. Times were not very great then. But that's just the thing about the past. Not many people knew all that well how to make a big game. Whereas nowadays, you can make a game so big that it could really shock the world or break the internet. I mean, what else kind of transcendence are we going to have to talk about here? Anyways though, I'd say this marks another piece of HJN history. And with that in mind, stay tuned for tomorrow because I'll have some more things to talk about. Maybe I'll have to talk about another series relating to games. And I feel like that a certain Bandai Namco horror series will have to suffice. Since I never talked about it before, I might as well take advantage of it while I still can. So, stay tuned for that tomorrow. Otherwise, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, follow me wherever you can find me, and stay on the Hollywood side for more.